Welcome to the second day of the OECD Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum. This year, we are focusing on the theme of securing natural capital. Yesterday, on day one, we had a good kickstart of the whole conference and had a detailed discussion on natural capital on land. Today, we are starting with this dedicated session to look into ocean-based natural capital. I'm very happy to have the honor of having Mr. Don Sim, who will be the moderator for this session, chair of the OECD Fisheries Committee and counselor in primary industries at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in New Zealand. So with that, I'll hand over to Don.
Thank you very much, Kumi, for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone calling from, I'm sure, a range of different time zones. I trust you're going well in these difficult times. To reiterate, the theme of this session is focused on identifying best practices, opportunities and challenges for greening the ocean economy. And we have some excellent and very highly qualified speakers here today to talk and debate on this subject. Following a scene-setting presentation, the panellists will focus their interventions and debate on the four main policy questions that I will shortly outline, with the overall objective of identifying best practices, knowledge gaps and priorities for future work by the end of this session. We, of course, want to hear from participants from outside of the panel, and so we'll do our best to move through the panel discussion and take some questions for the panel to respond to. So just to quickly reiterate the four policy questions that the panel is going to be focusing on today. First is how do challenges and opportunities for sustainable ocean management vary across sectors that rely on ocean-based natural capital? How can policy coherence across the different ocean uses be improved? Second is what is the contribution of the ocean to human well-being? What is the relationship between sustainable ocean resources management and climate change mitigation and adaptation? Thirdly, how can technology support sustainable ocean management? What barriers could hinder their transfer internationally, including to developing countries? And finally, are there any trade-offs between economic growth and sustainable ocean management? Do policies aimed at conserving and sustainably using ocean-based natural capital create winners and losers? And how can these be managed? So just quickly, as I said, we have an excellent panel and an excellent scene setter. I'm just going to, the full bios of our panel are on the website, but I'll just give a quick introduction before the panelists take the floor. Firstly, Dr. Russell Reichelt is highly experienced in marine science, ocean governance and policy and marine protected area management. He's currently representing Australia's Prime Minister, who is a member of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. He's a member of Australia's Climate Change Authority and has served as the Director of the Australian Institute of Marine Science and as the Chairman of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. Secondly, we have Celine Frank. Ms. Celine Frank is a Policy Officer at the Directorate General of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries at the European Commission. She's worked on various EU policies related to the blue economy sectors, aquaculture and maritime spatial planning for the past 5 years. Helena Ray is a Program Officer, Sustainable Tourism at the United Nations Environment Programme. Ray has been working at the UN Environment Economy Division since 2005, and she works at the Consumption and Production Unit and is responsible for mainstreaming sustainable consumption and production patterns in tourism value chains. Ariel Troisi is the chairperson of the International Oceanographic Commission at UNESCO. She's also the Technical Secretary at Servicio de Hidrografía Naval, is head of the Oceanography Department, where she has overall managerial responsibility for the department, oversees the development and implementation of programs and projects and provision of services to the general community. Monica Verbeek is Executive Director at Seas at Risk, the Brussels-based umbrella organisation of environmental NGOs from across Europe that promotes ambitious policies for marine protection at European and international level. Seas at Risk has over 30 member organisations spanning 17 countries, representing millions of citizens. So with that, I think, given our limited time and so much to discuss, we should move straight into our scene-setting presentation. So I'd like to warmly welcome Russell Reichelt to deliver the presentation to start our discussion. Over to you, Russell.
Thank you, Don, and thank you to all online. Hello, bonjour, good tag. Yesterday, Professor Dasgupta described the dire situation in the world's natural systems and biodiversity. It seems many of the SDG goals seem out of reach to us, and we need to create a new relationship or rebuild the ancient relationships between people and nature. Today, we're talking about how to secure ocean-based natural capital. Australia is proud to be a member, through our Prime Minister, Mr. Morrison, of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, which is co-chaired by Prime Minister Anna Solberg of Norway and President Tommy Remengesau of Palau. The 14-nation Ocean Panel is the only global ocean policy body consisting of serving world leaders. The panel's purpose is to amplify and accelerate action for ocean health and wealth together, not one without the other. This is very relevant to our topic of securing natural capital. The topic of today's forum does resonate strongly with me personally. Don mentioned I've served as head of the Australian Institute of Marine Science and of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. My first dive on the reef, as we call it, was in 1968. And with the impacts of global warming, the reef is under extreme pressure. And look, this Great Barrier Marine, roughly the size of Italy. It's a good example of spatial area management. And, excuse me, Don, it says my internet connection is unstable. It's 33% highly protected and 67% is for low impact tourism, shipping and recreation. The reef's future depends not only on reduction of atmospheric greenhouse gases, but also on restoration and protection of its massive natural capital. So I come from this space. The Ocean Panel began work in 2018, and next week on the 2nd of December, the panel will release their statement called Transformations for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, a vision for protection, production and prosperity, spanning 5 sectors: ocean health, wealth, equity, knowledge and finance. The panel's transformations framework is clear that a sustainable ocean economy can be achieved only by restoring and maintaining a healthy ocean. The panel has involved 240 experts and commissioned many supporting technical papers. For today's meeting, I acknowledge Mansi Kona, Helen Ding and Christian Telecki from the World Resources Institute, on whose work I'm drawing for the presentation. Now, Enrico, are you able to share the slides? Thank you. I'd like to give a special thanks to the World Resources Institute. Christian and your team, you have been amazing as the Secretariat to the Ocean Panel. I also want to call out the OECD. You have engaged very strongly with the panel's deliberation over these past 2 years, so thank you to the OECD. The next slide, please. What is the case in favour of investing in achieving a sustainable ocean economy through protecting and restoring natural capital? I'll take you straight to the results, so there's no mystery. The numbers are very compelling from the WRI analysis. The benefit cost analysis from the WRI team highlights how important the ocean is and how it supports both economic activity and human well-being. To jump to the answer, the analysis demonstrates that ocean-based investments yield 5 times greater than the costs. For an investment of $2 trillion over 30 years, there's a net benefit of $8 trillion. These benefits are found not only in the finance sector, but also in environment and human health spheres. The next one, please, Enrico. The analysis focuses on 4 ocean-based policy interventions. I would call them radical transformations, or to borrow a phrase from my friend Martin Stushti from Systemic and his colleagues, the title of their 2016 book was called A Good Disruption. Firstly, they looked at conserving and restoring mangrove habitats, a 3-to-1 return. Secondly, decarbonising the international shipping sector, 4-to-1 return. Increasing the production of sustainably sourced ocean-based protein for food, 10-to-1 return. Scaling up offshore wind and energy production, 12-to-1 return. In the diagram, you can see the benefits generated from these interventions. Now, look, these interventions would also contribute to global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and move the world to to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The results are very important for another reason, because we need more awareness of the return on this investment for policymakers. It will strengthen the economic case for action to secure our ocean-based natural capital. Next one, please, Enrico. Now, what does success look like in practice? Let's look at examples. The really rapid transitions to a sustainable ocean economy more likely will happen when different economic sectors join together and their efforts are multiplied. The synergies switch from small incremental advances to major exponential positive change. Now, what does the future look like where ocean-based natural capital is secured and the transition happens rapidly? Firstly, these are my projections. Coastal tourism will combine with coastal restoration and aquaculture benefits to coastal communities, alleviating poverty and hunger. Secondly, ocean-based renewable energy will combine with ocean food production, especially zero or low impact aquaculture. And in Australia, our Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre is now bringing together national and international expertise in aquaculture, in marine renewable energy, and in offshore engineering. Thirdly, increasing volumes of cheaper zero carbon fuels will power the large Cape-class bulk transport ships and container vessels through to all sizes of fishing vessels. And there will, in addition, be opportunities for innovative engineering in upgrading port facilities to deliver these new fuels. I should add that Australia's recent commitment to a national hydrogen strategy will see, we're a trading nation, we will see our major ports providing zero carbon fuel for future maritime transport. And finally, a fourth example is that renewable energy will power production of recyclable materials that will replace current fossil carbon-based plastic, so we can halt and reverse the rising tide of plastic that is currently increasing pollution of the ocean. In future investments to support these changes, we will also see the innovative finance and human equity considerations, along with natural accounting, being factored into investment decisions, including UNEP's Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles and the emerging nature-related financial disclosure laws. A final word on human equity is very important. In Australia, economic growth and infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific region, in our neighbours, we do take specific actions to identify and address constraints for women to participate and benefit equally with men. We're coordinating with the Pacific Community's Women in Maritime program in efforts to connect, educate, support and inspire women in the maritime sector. Through the rural training centres, women are being supported with job placements in shipyards and maritime operations. These are matters Australia takes very seriously and values highly. I finish with saying there are tremendous benefits for a sustainable ocean economy and a healthy ocean in moving rapidly to restore and protect ocean-based natural capital. I wish you a good discussion. Thank you all very much. And now back to you, Don. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russell. That was an excellent start to set the scene for our discussion today. I really was pleased that you referenced the WRI study. I wasn't aware of that study before this session, and I found there was some really interesting analysis if reading through the report. And I think a very clear mandate from the analysis for protecting and restoring natural capital, and some pretty clear numbers around benefits far exceeding the costs of taking action. Just wanted to reflect on some of your other points. Clearly, the importance of partnerships between different ocean economy sectors, energy, tourism, food production, aquaculture came through very strongly for me. The importance of new technologies and innovation was very strong for me, including the point on low carbon fuels, innovative finance and recyclable materials. As chair of the Fisheries Committee, I was pleased with reference to the important future role of sustainable fisheries and aquaculture practices. Clearly, international fisheries issues and international oceans issues go hand in hand, and achieving positive long-term outcomes for the ocean is heavily dependent on achieving sustainable fisheries outcomes. Just finally, there where you referenced the important role of women and the importance of the ocean sectors for our region in the Pacific is highly valued as well. And finally, I think the point on, I found the WRI report really interesting in terms of ongoing discussions on food systems at the moment. Given there is quite some focus on the role of ocean-based protein for human and planetary health, I think that will add to the ongoing discussions on sustainable food systems. So with that, I won't take up any more of the floor's time. You've set the scene for some good discussion with the panel. So I'll hand over for responses and their own input from the panel. Firstly, we have Celine Frank to take the floor. Hand it over to you, Celine.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Russell, for the really good introduction. Hello, everybody. Bonjour à tous. So today I'd like to present Maritime Spatial Planning, which is a relatively new but pretty effective tool to anticipate changes and manage our oceans sustainably. So humans have been using resources from the sea for more than 165,000 years. And for most of that time, we thought those resources from the sea were inexhaustible. It took about a century of overexploiting those resources to realize how much we needed to protect and manage our seas. So maritime spatial planning comes quite late in this context, much later than land use planning. But some countries have already used this tool for years or even decades, and there are positive results and best practice examples all around the globe now. So maritime spatial planning has the main goal to reach a fair distribution of human activities at sea in order to achieve ecological, economic, and social objectives in line with the Sustainable Development Goals 14. In a well-managed sea, access to maritime space must adopt an ecosystem-based approach in which impacts are kept at a minimum level in order to safeguard the marine environment and resources. So coexistence at sea is not only possible, but it's also highly beneficial for all sea users, because in that way you can maintain monitoring and maintenance costs quite low, as well as reduce your climate and environmental footprint for each of those sectors involved. Especially as we go further offshore, since the space can become quite crowded in coastal area. So there are already very good examples in the water of multi-use between, for example, offshore wind farms with tourism, fisheries, and aquaculture. If you see the image at my back, that's a Danish wind farm in which tourists can actually climb up the turbines, visit the whole site, and enjoy the view. So, of course, multi-use at sea should be incentivized by planners and policymakers. In the European Union, we have a specific law, a directive on maritime spatial planning, and the year 2021 is quite an important one because it will be the first year in which all our member states will have a plan in place for their seas. And from then on, the European Commission will analyze and assess all those plans and their implementation. In order to be fully efficient, those national maritime spatial plans, they have to be aligned with international biodiversity and climate objectives. And in the European Union, we are now putting more and more efforts in reaching those goals, as attested by the new European Green Deal and all the strategies that were issued this year, notably the biodiversity strategy and the offshore renewable energy strategy that we just issued last week. So to plan well the sea, you need to look at it in a long-term perspective, but also at relatively large scale, because cumulative environmental impacts do not stop at borders. We need a coordinated approach, especially in terms of research and knowledge sharing on the environmental impacts. Cross-border cooperation, especially at sea basin level, is also a very important enabler for the development of certain activities, which will help us reaching our climate goals, such as the development of offshore renewables. And finally, I want to say that there's already a strong coordination internationally, notably with the IOC UNESCO on maritime spatial planning. And together with the European Union, we have a joint roadmap to address SDG 14. And we also developed a lot of guidelines in relation to maritime spatial planning. And I invite you to check the platform of MSP Global. Thank you. And back to you, Don.
Thank you very much, Celine. I think we'll reflect and summarize some of those excellent points later, but just in the interest of time, I'll hand over to our second panelist, Helena Ray.
Thank you, Don. I'm delighted to participate on this session on behalf of UNEP to provide insights on the tourism sector and how we can build back better after the pandemic. As we all know, tourism is going through unprecedented times due to the COVID-19. While the reduction of tourism flows will have some benefits on coastal and marine ecosystems due to the reduced pressure from activities such as cruising, marine recreation, as well as reduction in wastewater emissions from hotels, the economic impacts of reduced tourism operations on jobs and businesses is huge. The pandemic and the subsequent closure of natural protected areas has had a destructive impact on the communities that protect it. Many marine protected areas use the income generated from tourism to fund law enforcement, conservation, and staff salaries. It has now been several months without tourism revenue, bringing many marine and coastal protected areas into a financial crisis. The release of staff and suspension of law enforcement can easily lead to an increase in illegal activities, reducing in-ocean conservation activities, such as coral reef propagation and beach cleanups, which have been paused. As tourists are not there, local traditional tourism and fishing communities have lost their income and have few other alternatives. Safety operational procedures and protocols to combat the pandemic have on one hand led to an increased use of single-use plastic products in packaging and chemical use, while at the same time put pressure on waste management systems, many of which were already under stress before the crisis. While sustaining the livelihoods of people is a priority by many countries, there is an opportunity to prioritize sustainable consumption and production, as mentioned yesterday, and align tourism policies with the 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement, and biodiversity targets to build back greener. During the past months, we have seen some very promising examples on promoting sustainable recovery of tourism and securing ocean-based capital. For instance, the upcoming Colombian tourism strategy is looking at increasing the protection of marine and coastal areas in alignment with SDG 14 and sustainable use of oceans. Government, businesses, and communities have increased their coordination to recover from the pandemic and pollution from tourism. But these harmonization efforts remain limited in scope and scale. The effectiveness of recovery plans and policies should be enhanced by structures that allow the coordination between all stakeholders, including the different ministries and public authorities. And as Rachel mentioned, enhance cross-sectoral approaches. And the adoption of economic and legislative instruments based on a science-based approach to support decision-making. The current planning of recovery and related investments by the public and private sector is critical and needs to integrate sustainability, biodiversity conservation, climate action, circularity in tourism strategy through consultative processes. Recovery payouts, recovery packages and corporate bailouts should be structured in ways that reduce, not increase, ocean pollution in order to strengthen the resilience of destination societies and economies. Finally, the decision in investments made now for building back better will be crucial. And these obviously require a systemic change and new tourism models for activities at oceans and coastal areas. I pause here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena. I think that was excellent. We've now had some useful points on maritime spatial planning and now on tourism, and that was very useful in terms of already identifying some of the gaps and potential opportunities for future works, which we can touch upon at the end. I'll now pass the floor over to Ariel.
Thank you very much, Don. And following, and of course, thank you very much to OECD for inviting us to be here with you today. Following Russell's scene setting, it is clear that proper understanding of the ocean and its processes based on the best available knowledge is fundamental. But the fact is that there is an asymmetrical distribution of capacities and capabilities to address challenges and opportunities for sustainable ocean management and fully benefit from new technologies and developments. There's also a need to identify and overcome barriers, in particular those related to what we can call the 3 Gs, geographical barriers, gender barriers, and generational barriers. The UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development will start a few weeks from now, January 1st. And the decade is proposing a paradigm shift in the way we produce scientific knowledge for societal benefits. This decade is transformative in nature and is based on the concepts of co-design, co-development, and co-delivery in a multi-stakeholder and enabling environment. And it's important that we remember that it's ocean science and not just oceanography, because it integrates all sciences related to the ocean, natural, human, social sciences. This decade is an opportunity for us to build strong and active bridges between natural and social sciences. In this sense, capacity development and the transfer of marine technology have been identified from the outset as critical cross-cutting activities with impact on all pursued decade outcomes. The capacity development has to be understood as multidimensional, including formal education and development of human resources, but also the development of infrastructure, the institutional strengthening, communication and awareness, sustained resource mobilization, and of course, ocean literacy. That is understanding the human influence on the ocean and the ocean's influence on people. We need to put our efforts there. And by the same token, the transfer of marine technology also needs to be considered as multidimensional and not limited to equipment, because it includes the access to platforms, to projects, to guidelines and best practices, to data and information. In this sense, capacity development must be needs-driven and tailored to respond to specific challenges and overcome the barriers we have mentioned. Support tools such as the IOC's Global Ocean Science Report and the Ocean Info Hub, a clearinghouse mechanism, will contribute to matchmaking capabilities and requirements and achieve this goal of a sustainable ocean management and a sustainable ocean economy. Capacity development must be at the forefront of the planning and implementation of all our actions, including Ocean Decade actions, and cannot be left to be the last theme to discuss or implement, because it's critical to inform decision makers, policymakers, and community at large. Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you, Ariel. That was a very powerful message, and I fully support those statements around the need for capacity development and ensuring that everyone has access to these technologies. Okay, we're going quite well for time, but I will move on to Monica for the final panel intervention before we move into an open discussion. So I'll hand over the floor to you, Monica.
Well, thank you, Don, and thank you for having me here on this panel on this quite important issue, because ocean-based natural capital is very important, and a healthy ocean is a precondition for a sustainable blue economy. And we've already heard about the planetary emergency with the health, the climate, and the biodiversity crisis all affecting the ocean and its ecosystem services that support all life on Earth. And in Europe's seas, they're in a dire state because of overexploitation and also weak implementation of environmental legislation. Now, alarmed by this fast deterioration of the ocean, over 100 European NGOs came together, and together we developed the Blue Manifesto. It contains our vision for a healthy ocean by 2030, but also a roadmap with specific policy actions that should lead us to this vision by 2030. And these policy actions are structured around the protection and restoration of natural areas, around the transition to sustainable and low-impact seafood systems, and around halting the pollution. This Blue Manifesto calls for planning of human activities that will support the restoration of thriving marine ecosystems, just like what Russell said in the end of his scene setter, those kinds of activities that will help marine ecosystems to be restored. Now, this Blue Manifesto was our input into the European Green Deal and all the initiatives that it will foster. We also produced a joint paper about with concrete examples of the kind of investments and activities that the EU COVID recovery funds can and must support. These are win-win investments that will protect and restore the ocean, but also yield positive and sustainable economic results, like marine protected areas with beneficial effects for tourism and fisheries. And we just heard that recovery money is urgently needed there. Or ending overfishing and overcapacity of fishing fleets by supporting the diversification of the economic activity of fishers into ecotourism, or rangers of marine protected areas, or offshore wind farm maintenance. Or reducing shipping emissions and noise pollution by reducing ship speeds, creating additional employment. There's also, however, a very urgent need to address this growth push of the blue economy. A recent publication by the Stockholm Resilience Center shows a really daunting picture of the ongoing blue acceleration, as they coined it. It's a race amongst diverse and often competing interests for ocean food, ocean space, ocean materials, and it's leading to more and more to the degradation of the ocean. Now, Celine already pointed out that maritime spatial planning is an important tool, and that can help, ensuring an ecosystem-based approach to such an acceleration. But in practice, currently, maritime spatial planning is often aimed at economic growth, and it means that it's used to squeeze in ever and ever more activities into the sea. And that planning is often done on a sector-by-sector basis, instead of using an ecosystem-based approach. And nature is just seen as one of those sectors of the sea and one of the users. And more we see economic activities planned in marine protected areas without looking at the cumulative impacts and the consequences for the marine environment. Now, to really have a sustainable blue economy that focuses on new maritime activities like marine renewables and blue bioeconomy, we just have to accept that other activities like deep sea mining, oil and gas extraction, harmful fisheries, and dirty shipping, they will just need to go to make space for these new activities, these new, more sustainable activities. And also, the blue economy needs to be rethought to focus on what is needed. So looking at sufficiency rather than growth for the sake of growth. And this year, the OECD published a report that's called Beyond Growth Towards a New Economic Approach. And that emphasizes the need for breaking free from the GDP growth paradigm and to focus economic policy making on environmental sustainability, on rising well-being, on falling inequality, and on system resilience. And we should revisit blue economy principles in this light as well. And in doing so, see the ocean and land-based economies as an interlinked whole. Well, I'll stop at this and perhaps we can come back to it further down in the discussion. Thanks, Don.
Thank you so much, Monica, for that really impassioned and interesting contribution to the discussion. Now, I think we can move into more of an open discussion. We already have a few really good questions in the chat, but I think what we'll try and do is try and focus on the 4 policy questions for starters. And I'll make sure that I leave enough time, see how we go, we're about 5 minutes over time, but to ask a couple of those questions at least to the panelists. So I'd like to start on policy question 1, which was how do challenges and opportunities for sustainable ocean management vary across sectors that rely on ocean-based natural capital? And how can policy coherence across different ocean uses be improved? I think I've heard some points on this across a few of the presentations already, whether it be marine spatial planning, tourism, and I think, Monica, in your last presentation, you also had some interesting points on this. Maybe if I just open the floor up. Monica, did you have any points that you wanted to make on this policy question?
Yeah, thank you, Don. Yeah, I think we really need a coherent joint framework, right, to make sure that there's policy coherence across the different ocean uses. And I think by mainstreaming climate and biodiversity consideration into ocean policies and ensuring an ecosystem-based approach, that will already ensure a better coherence across the different ocean uses. Just making sure that everybody is agreed on the fact that a healthy ocean is really the basis for everything. As you can see in new SDG models as well. And then, of course, the next thing which you also really need to do is break down institutional boundaries and silos and make sure that policy office makers of the different sectors actually speak to each other, which is currently absolutely not happening at all. It can really happen that an environmental minister is completely unaware of the fact that as economic minister is at the ISA pushing for deep sea mining, whereas it is certainly something that should or she should be knowing of as well. So breaking down those silos and make sure policymakers talk to each other over the different sectors.
Thanks, Monica. I think that's a really good point, and certainly, just from my experience domestically, the importance of the fisheries people talking with the environment people and the foreign affairs people in the context of, say, treaties such as the biodiversity on areas beyond national jurisdiction, or the CBD discussions, Convention on Biological Diversity, is clear examples of where you need cross-governmental coherence in discussions. I certainly agree with that. Celine, I wondered if you had any comments on this, given you talked about different sectors working together and having coexistence.
Yeah, sure. I really agree with Monica here. It's crucial that different ministries, different sectors speak together, and it's actually one of the aims of maritime spatial planning. It's to put all these people together and first to plan what we're going to do with the sea, looking also at our environmental legislation and goals, and then make it work together. And in that sense, that's why I emphasize also the needs to find synergies between those sectors, which is not maybe the natural thing that those sectors do, because their activities are very different, and everybody wants its space. But in the end, it is proven that by sharing the space, you create very good synergies that are good for both sides. So that's really what we try to encourage, and also in the policies, and we try to encourage our member states to have it also in permitting criteria, etc. That's the more the space can be shared, the better. Another way to look at it is also to see that a good space for a certain sector is not especially a good space for another sector, and in the end, overlaps don't always happen. So we have evaluated that for offshore wind to become the first energy source in Europe, for example, we would need only 3% of the marine space. So this is not enormous. We have other targets like 30% protected marine areas. I don't think these have to clash, especially we just need to find the right space for the right thing. And as I said, in that sense, also working not only as a country, but as in a coordinated way with other countries at the sea basin level is really important.
Okay, thanks so much, Celine. I've sort of carefully noted down some of those points for later on. Did anyone of the other panelists want to raise a point on policy question 1?
Don, if I may, there's something we need to add. We cannot manage that we do not measure. So it's important to have sustained ocean observations in order to inform policy and decisions. We've seen the numbers and the return of investment. It's really huge. We need to invest in observations. And I fully agree with what was said by Celine about synergies and partnerships. Those are critical, and we need to inform those decisions.
Great, thanks, Ariel. And that's obviously consistent with Russell's opening presentation as well, the importance of synergies and partnerships. Unless, Russell, I'm not sure if you want to raise a point here, or otherwise we could go to the second policy question.
Just a quick one, Don. One thing that strikes me, having worked on oceans policy some years ago in Australia, we had, I think, the first oceans policy in 1998. And there are principles about creation of protected areas like comprehensive, adequate, representative, and other things like removing damaging things like harmful subsidies. What's come home to me over quite a few years is that there's too many problems to solve them all at once. But a good way to narrow the problems to make a difference is to take a threat and risk approach to it. So for Kiribati or Atlantic Ocean states, depending on where you are, look at the major issues that are driving both the negative effects and the opportunities for positive benefits, and narrow it to the things that are manageable. You can manage and reduce the problem to something that you can tackle practically, and you can attract sustainable finance for, and you have capacity, or you want to build capacity to solve. So in a sense, don't try and wave a wand and solve everything at once. Focus on whether it's spatial planning tools or financial investment tools. Look at the tackle and change the bigger problems and focus your energies on that. Seems to be more practical. So there's a risk in trying to solve everything and nothing at once. Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Russell. And yeah, that fits with my memories of studying different attempts at ocean policies and the complexities and trying to really not knowing where to start, and in terms of putting it in regulation and trying to agree on how to implement it. Okay, just in the interest of time, I think we'll move to the second policy question, which was, what is the contribution of oceans to human well-being? What is the relationship between sustainable ocean management and climate change mitigation and adaptation? I am happy to open this up to the panel. So I think maybe Monica had something she would like to say on this.
Thanks, Don. Well, on of course, having the danger to state the obvious, contribution of the ocean to human well-being can't be overestimated. It's tremendous. It's huge. It provides foods and jobs, but also all the important ocean ecosystem services supporting life on Earth. But it's even more recent research shows that the ocean is a real contributor to happiness, right? It shows that people are less depressed and feel better near the sea, for example. Shouldn't be underestimated in these depressing COVID times. And also, the relationship between sustainable ocean management and climate change mitigation adaptation, well, again, quite obvious that sustainable ocean management can enhance the ocean climate resilience, right? By thriving and diverse marine ecosystems, they're just better equipped to cope with the changing marine environment due to the climate change. Like, for example, you can have fish stocks fished at levels that prevents collapse or that ensures maximum sustainable yield. But you can also fish at a lower level to take into account the changes in reproduction and migration due to ocean warming, something that will be more and more need to be applied in order to be able to adapt to climate change. And of course, sustainable ocean management can also contribute to climate change mitigation, not just by protecting and restoring carbon sequestering habitats like kelp forests or mangroves or seagrass beds, or carbon sequestering species like whales, but also by promoting ocean renewables in a way that does not impact ocean biodiversity. But all these are ways to mitigate climate change.
Thank you very much, Monica. I will now hand over to Celine. Did you want to have a comment on this point?
Yes, sure. I think Monica already gave a lot of good example on how to make this integration of climate change mitigation and adaptation in our ocean management. Just on top of that, I think about to come back on maritime spatial planning, I think it has to be, in a sense, inclusive and participatory because, of course, they are the sea users, they are the coastal communities, they have to be involved and in a sense, to decide what is going to happen with the ocean. So it's also a way to find those synergies that I was talking about, because if you don't involve the people who are benefiting using the sea, you're not going to find those common grounds. And usually a good participatory approach from the planning phase onwards, it makes the actual management much smoother because you have resolved already conflicts that may arise. That's the ideal situation, of course, but also usually if your maritime plan is already having a long-term perspective, it should integrate modeling tools as well that will include climate change, for example. So that's one of the way you can include enough parameters, and on that, as Ariel said, knowledge is quite key. So whatever more knowledge we have to include in our plans will be very useful, and that should be done to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Celine. Yeah, that's certainly, your point certainly fit with my experience of listening to different discussions on use of coastal space in terms of aquaculture development and tourism, and it's very important to have a participatory approach. Did Ariel or Russell want to have a statement on this point? Ariel? No.
I had to unmute myself.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was reminding, when it comes to this point, I always remember Peter Thompson's words when he says that the ocean is the life support system we have in this planet. So as for the contribution to human well-being, and as Monica was saying, even in psychological effect, it's really important. We need to continue pushing the agenda of the nexus between ocean and climate. And I think that is really important. And it goes again to this ocean culture and ocean literacy and understanding how we relate to the ocean and with the ocean.
Don, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of well-being, I think this is at the heart of the issue, and I agree with comments from colleagues. I've worked over many years with friends who are First Peoples of Australia. They have 65,000 years of continuous culture, the most ancient culture on Earth, living culture on Earth. When I talk to Indigenous friends and ask them how they think about looking after nature, they don't understand me because they are part of nature. They see themselves as part of it. It's one thing. They have sea country and their country on land. And when I was in Rotorua at the Ellen MacArthur meeting, the Maori people, Don, spoke the same way. They see themselves as they're not different from nature. They're part of this system. And I think I've seen a recurring theme in multiple forums that we need to rebuild. Some peoples, plural, have that relationship already, but many of us don't, especially if we haven't grown up with that culture. And I think a lot of our lack of regenerative, lack of circularity, lack of understanding of the natural capital comes back to understanding our relationship with nature. And I think we need to rebuild that relationship for those of us who have lost it. And so I appeal to everybody listening to be sympathetic and learn from those cultures that haven't lost it. And we need to regain that and rejig our economic systems to put that value back into nature. Thanks.
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, very, very glad that you referenced Indigenous groups, and my point was also going to be on Pacific Island and small island developing states who are so reliant on fisheries in the oceans for their well-being. Helena, sorry, I haven't given you the floor yet. Did you want to raise a point?
No, I think that I would repeat myself here.
Okay. I just think, given the time, I would like to, we want to get through the policy questions, but I would like to acknowledge that we do have some great questions coming through the chat. So I might just have a look at one of the questions. I was interested, given a lot of the focus of the meeting this week is on COVID, I just wanted to have a bit more reflections to this question. What would be the COVID-19 impact of projections when securing ocean-based natural capital? Just in terms of interpreting that question in this discussion, I wondered if the panelists could have a think about the three objectives, which were best practices, knowledge gaps and future work, especially knowledge gaps and future work, and maybe challenges related to COVID as it relates to the challenges that COVID is facing, is causing to the objective of supporting natural capital in oceans and the topic we're talking about today. I wondered if anyone would like to make any comments to respond to that question. Celine?
Yeah, I think Russell also wants to say something. Oh. I will start first. Okay, yeah, it's a pretty vast question, and I think indeed the blue economy sectors have been affected by the COVID-19 crisis as any other sector, basically. But we also see some opportunities there, and we see that those sectors that we now push forwards, like offshore renewables, they have been affected, but not so much. They are already recovering. They are already boosting themselves to reach the goals that they have set themselves, and then that we are setting also at international levels. So I think we can also see it as an opportunity to rediverge finance where it should go. Of course, there is also an emergency to solve first, but that's one thing we're trying to do with our next generation EU fund and the resilience and recovery fund that we put in place in the EU. So the idea is really to direct whatever recovery we want to have from this crisis towards the right things that go in the sense of climate and biodiversity protection.
Thanks, Celine. Russell, did you want to take the floor?
Yeah, on COVID quickly, I've been working with colleagues in IUCN, WCPA, and look, it brings home to me the sudden shutdown of global tourism brought home how many protected areas rely on tourism for their management. The people that look after the protected areas rely on tourism revenue. And in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef tourism industry is about $6.4 billion per year. It went to zero for some months. And so whether you're a Pacific Island country or more, the kind of economy that Australia has, and I'm sure it's true around all of the people on my screen here. The impact has brought home to everyone to think about how you can manage for resilience in the face of future disruption. And I think that should be part of the conclusions from the forum here is the, well, natural capital needs looking after, but I think we need a more open mind about how we look after it, how we build for resilience, especially not so much for the tourists, but for the local people. If I think of my colleagues in Indonesia, the president, he has said last year that he's looking for resilient coastal communities, livelihoods, alleviating poverty and hunger. So I think if we take a broad view of natural capital, and if we look at building not just a simplistic single view, the protected area, but look at the economy and look at building for resilience in the face of future pandemics or disruptions, the increasing pressure of climate change. We really need to encourage broader thinking about how to build that resilience. Easy to say, I know, but there you go.
Thanks, Russell. Okay, I'm just wondering, does anyone else want to talk on that COVID point? Otherwise, we could move to the policy question 3, which I was quite interested to hear. Helene. Sorry, Monica. Sorry, I missed.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want, I know we're running over time, but I just wanted to reiterate not only that the recovery of COVID, at least in an EU setting, but also in other countries where there's big funds being mobilized right now to help with this recovery. It should, of course, be targeted to those activities that support the restoration of marine ecosystems, or that at least do not further impact marine ecosystems. I think that's very clear. The whole pandemic has showed us that we are indeed out of balance with nature, and also showed us how hard we need a healthy ocean and nature in order to survive. And therefore, indeed, as Russell also brought up, we need to rethink. I know I said it already, but I really want to bring home this point. We need to rethink a little bit our blue economy, and we should look beyond growth. We should look at an economy with a policy making that focuses on sustainability, etc. So by promoting those activities that do help ecosystems to thrive, and at the same time think of how to look at a better way at our economy, how to find also metrics to measure better an economy that does not only look at GDP growth, but also includes natural capital and social indicators. Those metrics need to be further developed for the blue economy, and that may also help us to get towards this blue economy that Russell was also describing that we need.
Okay, thanks, Monica. That sounds like a potential gap in an area for future work. Okay, I would love to look at some more questions from the chat box, but I've only got about 5 minutes before I need to wrap up. Maybe if we can just quickly touch upon policy question 3 on how can new technologies support sustainable ocean management and what barriers could hinder their transfer internationally, including to developing countries. I wondered, Helena, if you would like to talk to this one?
Yeah, thank you, Dom. I think that it has already mentioned today before the need for observation, and I think COVID-19 has highlighted this need, because the effective management of natural resources have been historically being hindered by the lack of information about how ocean and coastal zones are being impacted. So I do believe that digital technologies can assist those efforts. New technologies can support the analysis and collection of new data about sustainability hotspots in coastal areas in order to support the formulation of new policies and strategies. And as mentioned by Monica as well, to identify what are the new metrics. You know, we have gone from over-tourism to under-tourism. We have overfishing. So what are the indicators of success that can help nature thrive? The new technologies can also help introduce changes to the production of products and services through circular business models or the development of alternative operational procedures. We also have seen that over the COVID, where some disruption in some value chains have interrupted the regular business models. It also can enable change on sourcing and distribution logistics, especially in small island development states, which in many cases, you know, import goods and services. And that also during the crisis suffered more than other states. I think that this successful implementation of these new technologies, however, will require enabling frameworks in countries, human and financial capacities, especially for small and medium enterprises, and also support business intermediaries for implementing those technologies. Thank you. Over to you, Don.
Right, thanks very much. Very, very interesting points. I wondered if Ariel would like to follow up because you had some points on technology in one of your earlier interventions.
Yes, thank you very much, Don. And I will tie this with the previous question about the effects of the pandemic. So in terms of ocean observations, we must realize that when we started with the pandemic, research vessels were called back to the home ports. Research programs have been stopped, problems in servicing stations and stopping or interrupting time series of observations. Now with new technologies, we have the capability through, for example, autonomous unmanned platforms, surface, subsurface, deep ocean platforms to continue observing. So those are opportunities that new technologies are giving us. But once again, by the same token, we need to develop the capability for all to properly access, understand, and use that data and information. We don't need to have duplicated efforts, everyone trying to develop the same platform. But if we succeed in developing the synergies and partnerships for observations, then we can use the same data and reuse the data. And once again, as you mentioned, Dawn, and I said before in previous intervention, technology needs to be understood not only as the equipment, but also best practices, data, information, and access to platforms and projects, and of course, sustained funding. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Ariel. Yes, that fits very much with what we're seeing in the fisheries area as well, in terms of the difficulties with COVID and maintaining observer coverage on fishing vessels and the importance of new technologies, I guess, in terms of ensuring compliance and preventing illegal fishing. And certainly there are challenges in that space as well in terms of the ability to utilize those technologies are not everywhere and requires a lot of infrastructure to be able to utilize at times. We've run out of time, but I'd just like to have one final round of the panelists, maybe starting from Russell. Just your final thoughts on any key knowledge gaps or potential future work priorities. Those were our objectives, and we'd like to be able to help the OECD with our final interventions if possible. So best practices, knowledge gaps, and future work priorities. Any final points you have? I'll hand the floor to Russell.
Thank you, Don. Look, resonating from what Ariel and others, Helena and all of you have said, to me, it does come down to this connection to people and nature, that the technology does need a kind of a knowledge broker between the technology and the use of it. So successful interventions are well informed with good technology. They also need clarity of purpose. They need leadership. They need institutional arrangements that will deliver the outcome that people are looking for, and they need resources. So I think equity, finance, translation of the demands of nature and the economy are all very important, and all of those need to be progressed. So it's not one at a time, it's all of them need to be integrated in some way. So it boils down to linking people through the technology, through the policy, through the mechanisms available to actions which lead to a healthy ocean and a healthy economy. Thanks, Don.
Thanks very much, Russell. Turn over to Celine. Do you have any final comments on those key points?
Yes, I will also at the same time try to answer a few questions I've seen from the chat. There are concerns on the impacts of new activities at sea, such as offshore renewables. And that's understandable, but we have to think that there have been other activities at sea for a long time, and that's why I said the important thing is to look at the cumulative impact. And yeah, there was a question how to look at this cumulative impact cross border, and yeah, I think we already have good examples of cooperation in certain sea basins. For example, the North Sea, where you already have a lot of activities going on there, and we have the North Sea Energy Cooperation, which looks not only at the development of offshore renewables, but also at all these impacts. And I think what is crucial there is to find ways to share the information, the knowledge that is available, because there is a lot actually. We do a lot of environmental impact. All projects at sea needs to have an environmental impact assessment. But then the data are not always shared properly also on the monitoring, and we really need to set this framework, and I hope that this UN decade of ocean science and sustainable development will help also for this exchange of data between different countries, different sea basins across the world. And yeah, so that would be my call in terms of knowledge. So more research, but also better sharing of data will be crucial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celine, and apologies again to those who've raised questions, and thanks to Celine for making an effort to keep an eye on them and respond to them. Unfortunately, our time was quite limited. Helena, Ray, did you have any final comments?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I would like to highlight is that resilience will also mean that we need to rethink our economies. A country that is overly dependent on one single economy, like tourism, like fishing, it's not sustainable. And these need to be rethought by countries. See how these can be minimized, these dependence can be minimized over the long term, and look for green economy opportunities for thriving. Some solutions have been also suggested by Russell in his initial note, looking at more cross-sector approaches where we bring solutions in a more systemic approach. And I think that it's more my call for action. It's really moving forward to green economy models for current economy.
Thank you very much, Helena. And pass the floor to Ariel for some final comments, noting I'm slightly over time, so we'll have to wrap it up very quickly. Over to you, Ariel.
Thank you very much, Don. I'll be very brief. I think we are in the right track, building strong bridges between natural and social sciences towards sustained ocean management. We need to continue working in communication and awareness And we need to have a particular focus in new generations. And we need to work from school level in order to create this real ocean conscience. Thank you.
Thanks, Ariel. And Monica, you can close out this discussion for us.
Okay, very quickly, I just want to make very clear that there's limits to growth. Too many activities will degrade the ocean health. Of course, maritime spatial planning, technological innovation, efficiency will all help to reduce impacts, but it will not see a complete decoupling of environmental impacts of human activities. So we need to accept that with new human activities like renewables, like new bioeconomy, we will have to accept that other older activities that are damaging the ocean, like deep sea mining, like oil and gas drilling, need to go. And we need to get back to, or we need to get activities that will support marine ecosystems. And for that, we need to have a review of our blue economy, set new metrics, go beyond the growth of GDP, and perhaps even this forum for green growth and sustainable development should drop 1G. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Monica. And I'm going to have to close the session so that the next session can start. I think given that we've finished with an excellent summary of the main points from each panelist, I think there's not much more summarising I need to do. I'm sure the OECD have taken very careful note of all the excellent suggestions from a range of different viewpoints and expertise today. And I'm sure we've added some really useful input from an oceans perspective to the discussions this week. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone. Again, apologies to those who asked questions that we didn't have time to respond to. We'll take note of those questions in writing up the results of this event. So with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists again and to the OECD team, and we will close this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don, for your excellent sharing. Very excellent, very active discussion. Thanks again.